Hello, everyone. This is Carlos Cabrera, your host for FinTech Today. We have here a very exciting guest, Darren Voros. He's a real estate investor as well as an educator and coach. And his YouTube channel covers all aspects of real estate, renovating, financial independence. So we are very excited. Welcome, Darren, to FinTech Today.
Well, thanks for having me, Carlos. Appreciate it and excited to be here.
Thanks for your time. We appreciate it. And we're wondering at this moment, is it possible for, say, a Canadian to invest in the real estate market, US real estate market with no credit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's something that's very interesting for a lot of Canadians is investing in the U.S. market. A couple of reasons for that. One, the Canadian market is getting a little expensive, I think, for a lot of people. It's harder to make our numbers work sometimes in Canada. So I know that a lot of people are focusing their efforts on the U.S. market. A lot more inventory in the U.S. There's a lot more competition there as well because obviously the population is higher. But in terms of getting financing as a Canadian, absolutely, we can get financing in the U.S. with no credit history. We don't get the same options as the Americans with a credit history, of course. So we'll generally pay a little bit more for financing our properties south of the border. And also, there are some Canadian lenders now, obviously, in the U.S. Most of the big banks have our operations there. So Scotiabank, TD, RBC, all have American arms now. So you can actually get an approval with a Canadian bank for a U.S. property, and they will give you a little bit better terms than some of our U.S. lenders. But those Canadian banks, from what I understand, they only do operations in certain states. So check with your Canadian bank if you're going down and investing in the U.S. But those are kind of your options as an investor in the U.S. market. But there's always, of course, private lending as well. So those are a little bit higher rates, even more so than the institutional lenders. But if it's a simple thing where you're looking to acquire a property, private lending is always an option in terms of less criteria and less due diligence on the part of the lender because they're charging you more or they have more rights to your properties.
Sure. And do you recommend private lending for the starting investor, or is that something that should be kept for someone that has, say, 5 years of experience instead of just someone that is buying, as you always talk in your channel, his or her first property?
Well, it really depends. I think the challenge with private lending, as I mentioned, is it's more expensive.
Mhm.
And I think what happens with a lot of first-time investors is they don't understand the full process of what it takes to acquire a rental property and then maybe getting it up into operation and then getting it sustainable, right? We call it stabilizing an asset. So where you have income generating that covers all your costs and then some. So people generally grossly underestimate the time and energy that it takes to get your first property or under your belt. So in that case, I say be careful with private lending because it can escalate very quickly in terms of if you're borrowing money at anywhere from 10% to 20% interest, depending on the value of the asset, those costs can add up quickly. And if you don't have your timelines and your team nailed down and have a process in place, it can get very expensive. But at the same time, I wouldn't shy away from it if that's the only way that you can get into the rental market and you feel comfortable in all the things that I just said. Then private lending, for me anyway, as a more experienced investor, is the way that I pretty much buy all my properties now is with some form of private lending or some sort of hard money that gets injected into the deals.
I see. So basically, what you're telling our viewers is that private lending, even though it's more difficult, if you work the timelines, it can lead to a profitable operation for small investors, right?
Yeah, think about it this way. This is something that I teach people all the time. It's like, okay, so I go to the bank right? And I say, I want a loan for a property. And they're like, well, what is the property? What's your plan with it? And does it bring in any revenue? And a lot of times the answer to all three of those questions is the property is worth X amount of dollars. I don't know what the value of it's going to be when I'm done because I'm not done yet. And I don't have any tenants in there because it's not ready for tenants, right? Think
Right.
about it the other way around. So if I went and got a private loan from somebody and I renovated that property, let's say I was going to take a single family dwelling and I was going to convert it into 2 units or something like that. Well, I go in and I perform that renovation work, and now I've got 2 legal units, and I go put tenants in those units, and now I go to the bank, right? And the bank asks me those same 3 questions. What's it worth? And are there tenants in place, and what are you buying it for? Well, the first answer to the first question is I already own it, right? So that's a big hurdle for the bank because the bank doesn't want to lend you money on properties you don't necessarily already own. But if you own it, they're going to evaluate you differently. Second question, what's it worth? Well, I know exactly what it's worth because the renovation's complete and I have an appraisal in hand to tell me what's it worth. And it's also generating income already because I've got tenants and they're on a long-term lease. So I always teach people to go to the bank later in the process, right? I mean, obviously, if you can qualify for institutional A lender financing with the big banks and you get the best rates, go for it. That should be your first course of action. But if you can't, then the alternative is actually usually true, where you try to go and acquire the properties, get them to do what you want them to do, and then go to the bank at the end.
Sure, that makes total sense. And what's your opinion in terms of this inflationary times that we're living in? And do you think real estate offers our viewers a an option as a safe haven against inflation?
Well, real estate has proven to be one of the best hedges against inflation out there, right? I think when you look at the value of real estate, it's outperformed inflation almost across the board over the last 100 years. So I'm a big believer in it when it comes to hedging against inflation. Now, inflation is hovering around what 10 somewhere around 10% right now. Let's
Mhm.
let's let's be conservative and let's not take into consideration all the things. Now, is the real estate market climbing at 10% right now? Probably not. It's probably dropping at 10% right now, right? So if you take that correlation, then of course it doesn't make sense. But I'm a long-term investor, and I teach people that real estate is not timing the market, it's time in the market. So yes, this year inflation is going to be higher than the price of that real estate is going to rise. But if I'm investing for a 5 year or 10 year span, and inflation usually hovers around 2 or 3%. That's what all the government entities are trying to hit. My real estate portfolio has far exceeded that, and I am investing in some of those provinces and areas that are not necessarily seeing massive year over year increases, but it's still outperforming inflation. So I'm a big fan of real estate. And it's also because it's a tangible asset, right? I mean, I think that when you look at things like a stock portfolio or crypto or things like that, it's not, you can't drive by your crypto portfolio. You can't trade in your piece of paper, and you can't live in your stock portfolio, right? So I think there's inherent asset in real estate that just doesn't exist in a lot of other asset classes.
Well, and speaking of crypto, since you mentioned it, what is your take on some projects I actually have had in the past in in the last few months? They are tokenizing real estate. Do you have any opinion on what the future will be as far as that goes?
I have my ear to the ground on it, but I'd be lying if I said I was an expert by any means. I'm hearing that real estate in the metaverse is going to be the next big thing. I think that there's some people creating funds around real estate, creating an NFT around their funds. Some of the people that I follow are really into this space, and they're definitely going to be the leaders of this industry. I think it's inevitable that this new technology and this new way of life and currency will at some point flip to where it becomes the norm. But I think I would just caution people right now that if you're going to be investing money in those avenues, invest money that you are readily available to never see again. But also, and I think that that's the beauty of it. It could go
Yes.
to zero overnight, or it could make you incredibly wealthy, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're in this early, and this is like so early days of all of this technology and all of this, this new way, then then it's ripe for massive returns or massive losses. So if you go in with that mindset, then you should be good to go. Either way, you're going to be right.
That's a good way of looking at it. I agree 100%. And do you, in terms of, you know, that a lot of people have different strategies. I know you have touched upon different strategies to get started in real estate. Some of the strategies that I personally have encountered that have been suggested are the rent to own as an option to potential buyers, as an incentive for the buyers to get into the new investors property. Do you
Mhm.
see that as something that is doable in these times?
Yeah, rent to own is actually a pretty good strategy when the market is falling, and interest rates are rising. Because if you think about, somebody that was able to qualify maybe 6 months ago for a mortgage, that can't qualify now because of the rise of interest rates and the
Mhm.
rise in costs, then rent to own might be their only option. And in a falling market, if you could say to somebody like, look, I will sell you my property in 3 years' time with a 3% compounded increase year over year, that's a pretty good safe bet for you as an investor if you wanted to sell it. Now you might be wondering, like, well, who would agree to that in a falling market? Well, lots of people would agree to that because, like I say, this is a short term. The real estate market is very cyclical. It moves in a circle. It goes up and
Mhm.
down all the time. So on a 3 year, situation, we could be far out of the situation that we're heading into now, and real estate values could be climbing at 10 to 15%. So it's something where it's like it's a fixed rate of return for potentially somebody looking to sell right now. And then also, like I say, with qualifying power getting less and less every single day with rising interest rates and people just struggling to be able to get into the market, rent to own can be a great strategy.
That's interesting that you have a positive opinion in that. And also, is this a theme that we're talking about, rent to own? Is this something that you think is doable in Canada as well as the US, or do you see it more into an extremely competitive market such as the US one?
No, I mean, I think the US is in a very similar situation to Canada right now. I think the real estate market, they're very closely tied together. So I think that while the US market might be a little delayed, they're going to see the same kinds of things happening there that we're seeing happening here if they haven't started already, and I believe they have, right? In terms of the Canadian market, absolutely. I've got somebody who's part of my mastermind that's a wholesaler, or sorry, is a rent to own specialist,
Mhm.
and she's been killing it in Canada. And I know some people just focus on that strategy and that strategy alone. I know some people that just focus on sandwich lease options, which is not even owning the real estate. It's basically going to a person, and I'm sure you've heard of Airbnb arbitrage. It's kind of the same
Mhm.
thing. It's like you agree to rent somebody's place from them, you rent it to somebody else, with an increase in value, you take the difference. So you don't even actually have to own the real estate. So for those people that are out there that think that you have to have money to be a real estate investor, that's absolutely not the case. There's all kinds of strategies that you can use without having any of your own capital invested, and rent to own, sandwich lease options is one of those options to look at.
Well, the term is definitely it's sounds like very it's a new term. I've never heard of that one before.
Yeah, sandwich lease options. Yeah, yeah.
Good, good. And now, what's in terms of the next 3 years? What in terms of Canada and the U.S., which cities do you think offers new investors the best value for their money and the best chances to actually be successful in this new ventures that they start.
Mm. Well, I'll tell you, Carlos, if I had a crystal ball and I could tell you that, I wouldn't be sitting here with you right now. I'd be flying on my private plane somewhere around the world. But I think that when you look at the fundamentals of real estate,
Mm,
um, I think that's what we always have to go back to, right?
yeah.
Where are people moving?
Mhm,
Where are their jobs? And I'm talking about long-term jobs.
mm,
Where's their infrastructure? Where are the governments spending money on
mm,
infrastructure? um, where is there easy access to get to and from places to live and to work? um, as an investor, where are the most landlord friendly
mhm,
locations? Right, there are some provinces, U.S. states, that are very friendly to landlords. There are some that are not so friendly. So when you start to look at the fundamentals of real estate, what really drives real estate prices, if a market that you're looking at checks off, 5 or 6 out of those things, then that's a market that's going to grow in value, right? And I think also just getting into those fringe areas. So, I'm from Toronto, not originally, but I live here now. And if you look at what's happened in the Toronto market over the last decade, um, you know, Toronto real estate has been increasing in value, and you could take any major city across around the world and say, well, if you couldn't afford there, then where did you go to after that? You went to the next surrounding area, and then that real
yeah.
estate started to get too expensive, and then you went out from
Mhm,
there and out from there. We call it the ripple effect, and it's going to give you a roadmap for where real estate is going to go next. Just because people get qualified out, they can't afford to buy real estate in those expensive cities, so they start to get in their car. We say we get in there, they get in their car and they drive till they can qualify, right? So they just keep going until I can afford property here, and then they buy there, right? And that's where you'll see real estate values start to climb. So go back to the fundamentals,
mhm,
really look at all of those factors of what drives real estate prices, and then look at the ripple effect, and then look in those outlying areas, those areas that are looking to gentrify. That'll be your best bet for real estate investing. But personally, I'm a big fan of I'm still bullish on anything in and around the Toronto area. I've been shifting my focus to the international markets now. I'm looking at places like Costa Rica and Mexico, and I still think there's tons of opportunity in the U.S. market as well.
I see. Can you tell us a little about, say, in Latin America, for the viewers that are interested in that, such as, yourself? Uh, what do you see in terms of differences between, say, countries such as Costa Rica, a small country, and a bigger market, like, say, Mexico?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a couple things you want to consider when you're looking at a foreign investment. I think one is the stability of the area, right?
Mhm.
I know that, for instance, Nicaragua a couple of years ago was really hot. It was the next Costa Rica. People were going there in droves because, again, it was the same thing. People are like, I'm priced out of Costa Rica, and so they went to Nicaragua, right? But the government wasn't that stable, and then it kind of collapsed a little bit, and now you're seeing there's no tourism there pretty much at all. So if you owned property there, you've really suffered. So that's why I like places like Costa Rica more so than probably Mexico. Mexico is still a great country. I love traveling there, but if you looked at their system, it's a little more stable in Costa Rica, a little less corruption probably in Costa Rica than there is in
Mhm.
Mexico. Let's be honest, right? And so that's probably number one. And then if you look at where tourists go, like I look at Costa Rica, and I look at where the direct flights from like Toronto to Costa Rica, right? If they fly a direct flight, let's say from Toronto to Liberia, once or twice a day with each major airline from 6 months of the year, that's a pretty good bet that Canadians are going there. The airlines have definitely done their research. So that's a great indicator as to where you want to be. And then it's just a matter of what kind of asset you want to own. Like, is it something where it's going to be a personal use for you? Or is it going to be something where, hey, $1 million on a property that's close to the water, and I'm getting, you know, $10,000 a month in revenue on that Airbnb or that on that short-term rental. And if that's the case, you know, that hits what we call the 1% rule. And that's a 10% cash on cash return, and the 1% rule, that's a solid investment, right? So those are the kinds of the factors that I look at when I'm investing in a foreign market.
So from just for our viewers to encapsulate what you have, all the knowledge that you have shared with us today, basically, when it comes to analyzing a real estate deal, you go over the basics, such as the demographics of the areas, and then and then you, from there, you get into the specifics of the actual property.
Yeah, it always starts with the analysis of the area first, right? It doesn't matter what the property is like if there's nobody that wants to live there. You know, people keep talking about Detroit. Detroit, you can buy a house for 15 grand. I'm like, yeah, nobody wants to live there. That's why you can buy a house for $15,000, right?
True.
So,
True.
not to say there's anything wrong with Detroit. It's just that's the actual facts, right? There's just not as many people moving there as they're moving out of there. So it always starts with, you know, the area and looking at the demographics and the fundamentals, and then you start to go more granular and you look at, you know, street by street, what areas do you want to invest in and what kind of property do you want to acquire.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us your insights into the real estate market. Really appreciate your time, and I hope that our viewers can learn and evolve, as well as, you know, so all your students have into these markets, because there's a lot of opportunity. And now the floor is yours. If you have anything else to add to it, please go ahead.
No, I think it's a great point that you just brought up, and that is that in recessionary times, more wealth is created in those times than in up times, right? So if you are in a position where you know exactly what to do, especially as a real estate investor, there's opportunity right now. If you read the headlines, people are running away from real estate because they're like, property values are falling. Any savvy investor that I know is like, great, it's about time, right? Now I can actually go in, I can make offers, I can put conditions on my offers. There's lots of things on the market. I get to pick and choose which properties I want to, you know, do more due diligence on. This is the time for investors, right? So it's crazy what people do. They get excited when the market's going up. They buy on the way up. They panic on the way down. They sell on the way down, right? So it's like they buy high and they sell low. But, you know, savvy investors, we always buy low and we sell high. So in these times when we're seeing property values do what they're doing, you know, this is the time to get out there and to start looking at properties. And, you know, it always starts with education. So get educated and figure out, you know, what you're doing first. Don't just buy property because I told you to go buy property in a down market. Really understand why you're buying and what you're buying. And then you can make that educated decision on where you're going to be best set up for your goals and what you want to achieve as a real estate investor.
Well, there you go. So first demographics, purpose, and then the deal.
That's right. Absolutely.
Thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate you and appreciate all the videos and the knowledge you're spreading to and, you know, teaching all of us. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for having me, Carlos. It was great talking with you.
Thank you.